Doug.
Good evening, citizens, council, and staff. This is the regular meeting of the Littleton City Council for September 6, 2016. Call it to order. Will the clerk call the roll, please?
I'm sorry.
That's you.
That's me. Mayor Beckman?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Brinkman? Here. Councilmember Cole? Here. Councilmember Clark? Councilmember Shunanik?
Present.
Councilmember Hopping? Here. Councilmember Valdez?
Present.
Will you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
And to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Right after that one tonight.
We have an agenda. It's been posted and passed around to City Council. Are there any other changes or additions to the agenda? Tonight we have a presentation before we get to the regular council business. The 4th annual Littleton Twilight Criterium was held downtown Littleton on Saturday, August 6th. It was the second year that we've done this. It was the USA Cycling's national calendar, and it featured more than 300 riders and 5,000 spectators. A portion of the proceeds from the events is going to go to 4 local nonprofits, which will be making the presentations in just a moment. The 4 nonprofits are the Humane Society of the South Platte Valley, Littleton Public Schools Foundation, the South Metro Housing Options, and South Suburban Park Foundation. They have always provided volunteers for city events dating back to the Carousel of Music. In the past, we shared some of the proceeds from the Carousel of Music with these folks, and this year we're sharing some of the proceeds from the criterium. We could not have done the criterium without their help. So before we get started, we'd like to show a video of the race that was taken by our communications department. We have race directors Aaron Hugan and Michael Catterall here to speak, and then we'll do a presentation. If they're here, can you come down and take the mic for a few moments and talk about the criterium? Yeah, that would be fine right there.
Thank you, Council.
Good evening.
Can you hear me? So firstly, we'll be quick about it. We just wanted to first thank you for supporting the event. As you mentioned, it's in our 4th year. A couple of things we wanted to highlight is we are on the national calendar. We're one of the few races, if not the only race, that is truly a community event that's on the calendar, put together by an entirely volunteer force. We all, and the pedal folks, and a lot of the nonprofits that are here today, volunteer our time to put this together and hopefully bring, with the goal being to bring folks into Littleton, to raise cycling as a community, and then also to obviously bring in folks from around the country. And we will hopefully continue to do that. So we wanted to thank your support for this event. And also wanted to thank the city folks without whom we could not have made it possible, right? Becky has yelled at me for an entire 4 years now, and we would not have been able to do this without that. So I'll let Aaron continue with some of the other things, but the final thing that I did want to say is hopefully, as you can see from the video, criterium racing is, they call it the American style of racing, because it's in a closed course. We can control the event a lot more than, say, the Tour de France or the Pro Tour Challenge, and we're seeing more and more of that grow in this country. So having Littleton as one of the premier events, I've been to 5 different states this year on doing racing, and everybody that has been to our event loves it, and we think it will continue to grow from strength to strength. So we just appreciate your support. So.
Mike did a great job of reiterating just how this race wouldn't happen with all the support. So I'll give a little bit of perspective from kind of the racer side. And just from the people that raced it, they said, you know, why don't we have more races like Littleton? Nobody else does it like Littleton does. And my response is always because this is Littleton's race. They put this race on. And without the support of the municipality, these kind of races don't happen. So I just wanted to give that perspective. And when people come up to me and say, you've put on a great race, I say, I've hardly done anything. You need to go thank the city of Littleton for all that they did. So.
Well, it's a great team effort. I'd like to have representatives of the 4 groups that are going to be receiving checks come on down and we'll take some pictures. It's the Humane Society of the South Platte Valley, Littleton Public Schools Foundation, the South Metro Housing Options, and the South Suburban Parks Foundation. And one of them has a dog.
Wonder which one?
Which one?
There it is. Oh, good check.
Yeah, could we all maybe stand up best we can holding our checks? Yep. Let's get you guys maybe back here in between the left turn. Right along.
Bring me the dog.
Did you creep in? I mean, walk in. I guess not.
I'll just hold mine up for you.
And Mike and Aaron, you know, maybe at a future event, when it gets to the elite race, you can give Scott Christopher a little advantage, because it would be really exciting to have a hometown boy win.
You can leave the dog.
That's great. It's great when we can do that, and it's great when we have such partnerships with folks in Littleton. It really does make it all happen. They were quick to say that they couldn't have done it without us, but obviously we couldn't have done it without them. It takes somebody to carry the flag in those events, and they certainly did. So they deserve our thanks, and we're so glad we could contribute to their foundations and give some money to places where it makes a difference. This brings us to item 5 on our agenda. This is the first public comment. This is public comment on consent agenda items and general business items, because there's no public hearing associated with those events. We do have 3 public hearings a little bit later this evening. There'll be an opportunity at those public hearings to address issues that are relative to those issues that we're discussing. But this is the opportunity to talk about things that are on the consent agenda, because they don't have a public hearing that accompanies them, or any other general business items, which we don't have any business items on the agenda tonight. We have a general comment area at the end, and our intent is to, when we have a lot of business like this, people come down and they don't want to wait for what they don't have to wait for. So we've tried to separate this into 2 opportunities to speak. Public comments an opportunity for anyone to express opinions, to ask questions that are not part of the public hearings. There will be 2 opportunities for public comment at the beginning of the meeting regarding the consent agenda and general business items, and later in the meeting before council reports. An immediate response should not be expected. Anyone who would like to speak during either public comment session should sign on the green sheet. I have the first one down here, but I'll make sure I give anybody a chance if they've missed this. We expect comments to be civil, and disrespectful behavior will not be tolerated. There's a 3-minute time limit, and I have 2 folks who've signed up. First one is Pam Chadburn.
Good evening, Council. My comment is about the agenda online, and I had trouble downloading it. I got the first page of the agenda, and then I got a comment that the video record is the official record. I didn't get the second page at all. Maybe I was impatient. It seems like other people were able, after other attempts, to get the whole thing. But I just thought I'd ask you to see if there's any fix for that. When I downloaded the packet, I didn't get the whole packet either. So again, it might have been a problem of when I was trying to get it, but it would be nice if we could look at that. Thanks very much.
Thank you. We'll have the clerk and the city manager look at that. We talked earlier today that we've solved a lot of the sound issues and the filming issues, but we seem to have another issue, so we'll deal with that one.
I think the city clerk wanted to say something.
Sorry.
I think the city clerk wanted to say
Should I speak to that?
When we changed to the new website, we stopped putting the agenda and the meeting documents on the actual calendar, and that's where they were getting them from. And I think we'll reinstate that process because it's easier to download the packet from there off of the calendar, and that's where all of them were getting it before. So we'll just reinstate that practice, and I'll put them back on the actual calendar. It seems to be easier to download them then.
I see Cal signed up for the hearing. I'll keep your name for the hearing on B2. Any other speakers? Paul.
This is Paul Bingham, 236 West Delaware Circle. I'd like to second Wendy's suggestion. That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. That brings us to our agenda item number 6, consent agenda items. We'll have 3 items tonight, A through C. Consent agenda items may be adopted by a single motion. All ordinances must be read by title prior to a vote on the motion. Any consent agenda item may be removed at the request of a council member. Consent agenda item A is ordinance 15-2016. It's an ordinance on first reading, amending Title II of the City Code to change the name of the Planning Board to Planning Commission and making associated amendments throughout the City Code. Item B is ID 16-200. That's a motion to change the September 20th, 2016 scheduled regular meeting of the City Council to a study session with a start time of 6 p.m. for the purposes of reviewing the budget. Agenda item C is ID 16-202. It's certification of the August 16th, 2016 regular meeting minutes.
Cool.
203?
203 or 202? What is it? It's 203. Is it 203? Correction, that's ID 16-203. And that was pulled by Councilmember Clark. Can I have a motion for consent agenda items A and B?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Ready to vote?
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries unanimously.
Councilmember Clark pulled item C.
I move to approve, based on the recording secretary's certification, the August 16, 2016 video as the minutes for the August 16, 2016 regular meeting of the City Council.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for agenda item C, which is ID 16-203. Any discussion? Ready to vote?
The vote is 6 in favor, with Councilmember Clark voting no. The motion carries 6-1.
This brings us to agenda item 7. These are ordinances for second reading and public hearing. There's 3 items on the agenda, items A, B, and C. Each of them has its own separate public hearing. The first one is item 7A, which is an ordinance 13-2016, an ordinance on second reading amending Title 10 of the City Code concerning residential uses in the B2 zone district and repealing the moratorium. The staff member presenting this is Jocelyn Mills, our Community Development Director.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council. This before you is the public hearing for amendment to Title 10 of the City Code concerning residential uses in the B2 zone district, and also repealing the 90-day moratorium. Process, as you know, the first reading before City Council was held in mid-August, and prior to that, it had come to Planning Board for their recommendation to Council. And so we were at the second reading, which is the public hearing. This map is generally showing you in the orange areas all of the B2 zone property throughout the city. And the changes we're talking about this evening would be effective for all properties in B2. The proposal in front of you is regarding residential uses to be processed as conditional use. The other portion is to further define the definition of residential use. Planning Board at their July 22nd meeting made a motion to recommend approval, which failed on a 2-3 vote. And the main concern was that residential uses do not have the same level of impact to the neighborhood as other conditional uses that we have in the city code. Background, the moratorium, as you know, passed on June 14th. From that, we've held some study sessions with Council and Planning Board, and we did hold a neighborhood outreach public meeting, and we sent the other components to outreach were letters to B2 property owners. We did have about approximately 30 property owners reach out to staff. We did have a handful of applications that had to be put on hold or couldn't be submitted, if you will, or that had to wait till the moratorium is passed. We did have 2 that were already in process prior to the moratorium, and those were able to move through review. And we did notice the open house, social media and postcards, and we did send a second letter to property owners regarding tonight's hearing. As you know, June 28th was a joint study session, and we discussed several options presented to Council and Planning Board, and we received a lot of good input from that, and the direction was to focus on process, the character, and the fit, really focusing around scale and mass, and then protecting private property rights. So then staff evaluated and took some further analysis and came back to Council on July 12th with a proposal that if any residential use was be proposed as part of a project, it would be processed through the city's conditional use process. Additionally, to further define the term residential use and clarify that in the code. As you know, B2, the zone district in and of itself, is primarily commercial in nature. It does allow residential to be included for up to 50% of the building, and that's in section 10.12.4. There is no maximum height or setbacks for B2, but there is a floor area ratio of 2 to 1 and that determines the amount of building that can be put on a lot. So 2-to-1 allows a building twice the size of the underlying lot size. Some more detail around B2 itself. Retail sales and personal services meet the needs of surrounding community and range between 100,000 and 300,000 square feet size. The floor area ratio is 2-to-1, as I mentioned. So that means twice as much building can be put on the lot size. And then here's just some graphic representations of what the floor area ratio would look like. Other things do impact floor area ratio, and that is the amount of open space as well as parking. Those two things also impact your floor area ratio and what you can actually build on the lot. Further looking at the B2 properties and the buildings already constructed on those in our research, we did find that the majority of properties in B2 that have structures on them certainly are below the 2-to-1 ratio. But we did find that when residential use was included in a property, the floor area ratio the buildings tended to be larger, which shows on the end of this graph as it goes up, that's the residential components. So Chapter 8 is the city's conditional use code, and that governs all uses considered conditional throughout the city. Residential use appears to increase in floor area ratio in B2, so the recommendation is that if residential use is proposed in a B2 property, it has the potential to increase the impact to the adjacent neighborhoods, and so we recommend that we use the conditional use process. And what does that mean? Conditional uses are when uses have a greater impact to the surrounding neighborhoods, and they may be allowed if it's determined to be compatible with the adjacent properties. And this review and determination is by planning board. And then
Go back one more, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And then more specifically, the determination that planning board would have to make will be based on these items. So nature of the lot, the size of it, traffic, the arrangement of the structures, the landscaping and open space, lighting, signage, and of course, all other applicable zoning provisions would need to be met. The second component of the ordinance tonight is to further clarify residential use. So currently our code does not have a definition for residential use, so the proposal is to add a definition of residential use, which is the second half of this slide in front of you, and then also to, within the section 10.4.12, to change, there's one main sentence that talks about dwelling units, and so it would be to change in that sentence, strike dwelling units and insert residential use. And with that, thank you, and I can answer any questions if you have.
Do we have any questions? Councilmember Cole.
So a couple of probably silly questions, but do the ancillary activities and structures for residents include the pool, possibly a racquetball court, other kinds of things like that?
Could that, if it was for the residential use? Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. And would it preclude use of those things by visitors?
If they were visitors to the residential residents?
I mean, if they're visiting if people were visiting residents, could they use those facilities?
Yes,
Okay.
I would think so.
I'm just trying to.
I mean, it would just depend, but if it's a component of the residential use, then yes, whoever's
Okay.
visiting residential would.
Why don't you ask the question the other way?
What?
If they were, memberships were sold to the public, would that then be residential use or commercial
Well,
use?
you can ask that one. I'll let you ask that. So the rental of parking spaces for tenants, would they be renting those possibly?
So the definition, let me go back to it. So by adding this definition, the intent here is to clarify what constitute residential use, I think is what you're asking. So Here it says dwelling units and all other ancillary activities and structures related to the residents. So yes, if it's a racquetball court that is intended for the residents to use and the guests come of those residents to use it, they may use it.
But my second
would be-
question relates to parking spaces. So some tenants may not want or need parking, so that might allow spaces for somebody else to use. Could those be rented to the public? I mean, to people who don't live there?
So by clarifying this, it would mean that if you, Peggy, built a building tomorrow and part of it was residential units and they had associated parking spaces to those residential units, that would be reserved for those residents and it would be considered part of the residential use. If you wanted to say, well, you know what, the ground floor of my building is actually going to be a parking garage and I want to rent it out to anyone on a monthly basis, that would not be considered a residential use. That would, in our code, would qualify under a commercial activity because it would be, basically you'd be running that as a business, right? You'd be renting it out monthly to anyone to be able to park their car there, and that's operating as a business. So that would not be considered a residential use.
Okay, so no. Yeah, thank you.
Other questions, Phil?
Yes. Director Mills, on this one, we're talking about the conditional use and the hearing process, what that will allow for, which is somewhat different than what may occur today, is that there would be a public process. The conditional use hearing would be something that would come before the planning board so that any residential use in a B2 zone that's coming up new, in addition, would then have that public process.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Other questions? Phil?
Jocelyn, thank you for the presentation. I'm a little bit confused because part of the comp plan, right up front, relative to downtown, it says increasing housing diversity and densities to help enliven the streets and support the stores and restaurants. Yet by making housing or residential dwelling units a restricted use, it puts another hurdle in place as far as residential uses in a place like downtown. That seems inconsistent. Why was there a recommendation to approve that when it conflicts with a comp plan?
But well, as you know, the conditional use provision of the city code right now, it's not saying that you cannot do residential in, for example, in B2. It's just saying that we want to make sure that there's another level of review to ensure that that residential being proposed in the B2 fits the character of the surrounding neighborhood. So it's not, I don't believe, inconsistent with the comp plan. We're just adding another level to make sure that developers and the community are feeling that their project fits into the surrounding community, which I believe the comp plan does want to make sure that we are ensuring that whatever development is happening, it is in character with the existing neighborhood.
Other questions from council? Go ahead.
Since this is an attempt to clarify the situations that we got into with the Grove, if they had a swimming pool and a workout center and they decided to sell memberships to the general public, then how does that defined and settled by this definition of residential use?
So good question. And what the intention behind the definition here is to really clarify that residential use is only those dwelling units and anything connected to the residents themselves. So if there's a swimming pool and it is just for the residents only, then that would be part of the residential use. If it turns into wanting to be a monthly rec center, then that would not qualify as a residential use because that would be basically being run as some version of a business, and that would then qualify or be counted towards the commercial component of the property.
So taking the Grove as a further example, they could locate a commercial unit on each one of the floors and then count all of the corridor space as commercial corridor space rather than residential corridor space. So this definition here, it doesn't actually help us at all.
I believe it does further clarify the code so that that's not an opportunity, and anything related to the residential would have to be counted as a residential use. So any ancillary activity and structures related to its residents.
So going back to the rec center, if the rec center was built for the residential use of the apartments in the building and they sold one membership as commercial, how would the square footage of that rec center be counted? Would that be residential or commercial? Because you just got done saying it would be commercial if they sold memberships.
If they sold memberships to the general public, then that would be considered a commercial use.
So if they put a commercial unit on a floor with 30 residential units and sold that commercial unit to a commercial use, then all the corridor space and all of the related functions would then become commercial.
Based on, it would have to be looking at it, how it would be laid out, but if there's a commercial unit and there's access through a hallway, then, and it serves that commercial unit, then that would be considered commercial, correct?
Even if the same hallway serves residential use. So this
Yes.
basically doesn't help us much.
Yes, it does. Or, I mean, well, I believe that adding this definition will further clarify the current issue around residential in B2.
Other questions from council? Bill?
Just to follow up on Doug's, why wouldn't it be counted proportionately? I mean, if there's,
Probably would. It just depends on how it's laid out.
because, I mean, I think that's one where we got into, there was disagreement on the Grove. If a building is 100,000 square feet and 40% of the actual floor plates that are rented are used for commercial use and 60% are residential, why wouldn't the corridors and garage space and common areas be counted by that same proportion?
It probably would. It would honestly depend on how it's laid out.
Okay, so that's not specified in the code in any way.
Currently, the way it's specified in the code is that the only thing that constitute residential in the B2 are the dwelling units in and of themselves. So we would like to clarify that, and that's
Okay.
why we would like to change that one sentence that says dwelling units, change that to say residential use, and then add a definition of residential use.
Okay, so are we hearing the same thing? I don't.
No, we aren't.
I don't,
because-
yeah.
Yeah.
I think we agree.
Yes.
A moment, yeah.
I'll take it.
Any other clarifications for the Community Development Director?
Would it be a fairer statement if maybe I'm not understanding then what Councilmember Hopping and Clark are advocating? So if this is my building and here is my swimming pool and here's the commercial unit and here's a residential unit and they share the same hallway to that swimming area, is that what you're saying? So yeah, in that case, I agree, then it would be proportionate based on both of those uses sharing that access to the swimming pool. What I was saying earlier is, here's my swimming pool, my commercial unit, here's my access from the commercial unit to the swimming area is only through that, for that commercial, then it would just be counted as commercial. Or if it was residential, my unit access to the swimming area is only for residential, then it would be counted as residential.
Yeah, I don't think and I don't
that-
have any problem if it's a corridor that only serves a commercial area or only serves a residential area, that it be counted as those types of uses. It's the ones that serve both, is that done proportionally or whatever? And I think you'd have to check with the county assessor, but I think they do divide according to proportionality.
Yes, so
And-
in that case, and if that was what you're asking, Councilmember Clark, then I misunderstood. I thought you were saying, if it's only served by one of those uses, that's how it's counted. If it's served by the same hallway, two uses, then we would do it proportionally based on
Okay.
that.
My point is, that's not what this definition says. And when we get done passing this, we're left to the judgment of whatever staff person decides to do at the spur of the moment, just as what happened with the Grove. Because we had, I think it was 300 square feet out of a 300,000 square foot building, and yet all the corridors were counted as commercial. And this really doesn't fix that. So if we're looking for a code fix for an interpretation issue, this doesn't get us there. That's my opinion.
So a follow-on on that, Jocelyn, just to make sure. So if a floor is entirely residential, the corridors would be included in the residential because that would be the use of those corridors on that floor. If a floor happened to be entirely commercial, those would be commercial spaces. It just brings up the question that Bill talked about, but it doesn't change the fact that in taking a look at the conditional use, there'd be a public hearing involved with some determination based on how the buildings are arranged, which seem to be part of the criteria, the arrangement of the structures, to actually say, okay, what counts, what doesn't count.
Yes to all that.
Thank you.
I think.
Other, Peggy?
So forgive me for asking something that sounds a little not nice. I'm thinking of a different kind of situation and asking this question. So we have some kind of enclosure with rooms, hallways, etc. And in one of those rooms, there's some really significant illegal activity going on. Now, that doesn't relate exactly to this, but I'm just saying this. Normally, I think, and maybe I'm wrong, if somebody's got some operation of ill repute or they're distilling something they shouldn't be distilling and selling it or whatever in a house, which occasionally does happen, I thought the whole unit, the whole place was labeled the same way and they're shut down. So it would seem to me, not that I'm wanting to shut down what you're talking about, but the concept of the part having a certain kind of activity, et cetera, designating what the whole thing is, would seem to, in my mind, make us apply the same kind of thing in this case, that if these units in this part are doing something, then that becomes what the whole thing is. And I know that probably sounds weird to everybody in here and anybody at home, but I'm having a little difficulty of the parceling things. And if we're saying something's a residential function, predominantly whatever, and affecting the residential neighborhood, I'm having difficulty with this, to have some commercial stuff or something else going on in there. Because it seems to me to affect the character, the neighborhood character otherwise. Now, if somebody wants to help straighten my mind out, please help.
I would say, well, first, generally, hopefully, when we're talking to people, they're not letting us know they're doing anything illegal. But through the conditional use process, if a project includes any portion of residential, because it may have a greater impact to the surrounding neighborhood, the intention is to bring it forward as a conditional use, so it would have that additional level of review to ensure that in that portion of the city and in that neighborhood, in that B2 property, that it fits within the character and makes sense to have a residential component for that property. Does that answer?
Well, I hear what you're saying. It just seems to me that this then becomes creep. If you have this place designated that way, then the place next door is likely to start being that, and the neighborhood gradually has that character changed, it would seem. I mean, in my head, but maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, in the code right now, it says no more than 50%, but sure, I mean, that can change the character of the property.
Thank you.
Additional questions or comments, Jerry?
When we first discussed this some time ago as a study session item, there were a lot of issues brought up that it seems to me they haven't all been addressed. And that isn't your fault at all. I mean, we gave you a matzo ball and said, go fix it. So how comfortable are you with this, that it's going to meet the comp plan? That one's not going to conflict with the other?
Yeah, I agree. When there was the first joint study session that you had with Planning Board, there were a lot of discussion around a variety of things from scale and mass to private property rights. So, and then process those were the big three things in my mind that came out of that. So then when staff was doing more research to figure out how do we want to move forward and what's our proposal, conditional use is not saying that it's residential may not be a good idea in the downtown, for example. So it's not conflict with the comp plan because it's not saying that residential is not allowed at all. The proposal is that residential can still be a component of a project, but if it is, then that has to come forward to planning for review and approval. So, and the criteria of the conditional use has to, fit within the character of that neighborhood, and really enhance the surrounding area. So it's just another level of focus for a project to make sure it fits within that specific area of the city, which I think can meet the intention behind the comp plan.
So without this ordinance, then, a developer would still be able to come into a property and have a proposed residential and then ask for conditional use? Would that be allowable?
Well, right now, under the code, it's just a use by right, so there's no conditional
As
use.
commercial only in that case?
Commercial and up to 50% can be residential in the code today.
In the code today?
Correct.
Okay. So what is the difference that this is allowing then?
So this is just saying that if you have residential, we will process it as a conditional use versus today, it's a permitted use.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Other questions? I've got a couple. One question is just, how did we get here to this point where we created a business district, a commercial district? It's defined primarily as being local business oriented. And then we created this very complex justification to place residential in with that commercial, so much so that we say it has to be within the same structure. So we don't allow a standalone. We talk about these ratios, but we really don't, I think until the Grove and an interpretation was given, which I don't agree with, on some of these things, we didn't really have an understanding of things like dwelling units or mixed live-work units, some of the things that just seem like they were created just for this situation where we're going to, in order to have it work, we're going to share a structure, commercial and basically high-density housing in order to make it work, because it has to be within the same structure. So it's going to be up on floors above, et cetera, to get the ratios. Why do we have this? Does anybody know the history of how this got to here? Because it would seem to me that all these issues are zoning and rezoning issues. And there are other parts of our zoning code which would be applied, which would give the flexibility to a developer to be able to do these things, and then they would include a hearing before council. So, did you know the history at all?
Let's see, how many hours do you have? Because we really should talk about, I think that which is not necessarily for tonight, but I believe part of the problem is that we have a zoning code that primarily was written many years ago, and the situation and the land use constraints and challenges, as well as the booming development and redevelopment happening right now, the current code is antiquated and doesn't really handle some of these conversations as well as we would like it to. And so as we know, that's one of the things that we'll be bringing forward to council here in a different venue, but about next steps for updating our zoning code. On the more specific question of how did that get put into the code to allow the up to 50% residential, it would appear just from reading the code that the intention was that it may be as an accessory use. Residential may be appropriate on B2 properties in certain scenarios, but no more than 50% of the structure to be residential. So I think the intention here is to continue to refine that so that we're getting the intention and the end result that we are expecting.
My other question is conditional use, and it was an issue for the planning board. It appears to me, as was the comment made by the planning board, when you make a decision to change something from commercial to residential, you're at a certain level of significance. And in my way of thinking, it's a zoning level and probably a council level of significance. But the issue was to place it as a conditional use, which to me is more of a way in which the pieces of the puzzle are moved around on the board, but not so much that total change in character. Can you comment on my concern that placing a residential label is significantly more significant than the other conditional uses? And you had that chart that kind of talked about what those others were. There you go. All those talk about, again, how the pieces of the puzzle are moved around, but changing something from commercial to residential, to me, is not a conditional use and would not fit in that list. It's kind of like one of these things is not like the other. It's residential, it doesn't fit. Do you have a comment on that?
Based on the planning board and the conversation they had?
And they apparently had a planning board
Yes.
conversation of the same nature.
I agree, they did. And I believe I agree with you as well that their end result was that they felt, so some other conditional uses currently in the city code are like commercial communication towers, and they felt that using that as an example, that potential use has more of an impact than adding residential in a B2 district.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Jocelyn. We don't have any further questions for staff. We don't have any other staff members to make a presentation unless the city manager or city attorney had anything to add, which would mean we'd open the public hearing. I'd like to open the public hearing at 7:19. I have a list of 6 people who have expressed an interest to address the issue. Pam Chadburn and then Robin Swartzbader's on deck. Again, you'll have 3 minutes.
Good evening, Council. I'm Pam Chadbourne. I live in District 1. First, let me make a comment about the assessor's use. So I had a long conversation with the assessor's office about this, and the way that the assessor assesses taxes is not the way that municipalities assess land use for approving land use proposals. It is not the same. It will never be the same. It shouldn't be the same. We need to evaluate the land use impact on the surrounding neighborhood, and they evaluate the way that the income is taxed. It's not the same, and we need to protect our communities in our code. And there's also the issue of switcheroos. So the concept is the developer comes in and says, I'm going to do this, and then, wow, suddenly after a year, I can't make money doing that. I'm going to move this around and do this, and suddenly you have a use that was never intended. I think our code now allows that. So that's a problem as well, and I'm not sure that this proposed change protects us. It hasn't been looked at from the point of view, I made this comment before, of a developer who wants to be aggressive and do stuff that might not fit. And that's a test that you should always apply to proposed changes. So we don't know how resilient this is. In fact, I'm pretty sure that a lot of us feel it's not protective enough. So let me compliment you, Mayor, for commenting that the conditional use just changes things around, but doesn't provide us adequate protection. The code should provide us explicit protections so developers don't come in the back door and convince people that, well, this really gets by or this is interpretable. The code should be explicit. It's not up to moving it to conditional use because that puts us, the people, in a continual crisis mode. By the time it gets through the staff and to the public process, then the neighbors are at a total disadvantage. The developer has already made inroads and promises. And the neighbors have to respond quickly, and that's the wrong burden to place on the people. That's what the code is for. Let me also say that this is only for B2. It's not about downtown. This is about land use in B2 in the old part of Littleton, and we should protect that. It is a feature of Littleton, and we haven't had that discussion yet, Council, and we should. What is the value of Littleton Boulevard and downtown Main Street, and how do we protect it best? So let me ask you, please put in the residential parking protections and make it clear that residential parking, whether it's charged or not, is residential use. I also want you to go further. Look at the FAR. Notice that almost nothing is over 1, and nothing is over 1.5. So lower the FAR limit and add setback requirements and add height limits. That protects us explicitly in code. Thank you, Council.
Thank you. Robin Schwartzbacher, and Don Burns is on deck.
Robin Schwartzbacher, District 3. Good evening. The ordinance explaining the B2 moratorium describes its purpose as, quote, recent land use applications do not appear to be consistent with the goals and vision of the community, unquote. Therefore, any changes to the B2 code should rectify this stated problem. Personally, I find the stated problem quite vague, but it does beg the question, why are the recent land use applications not consistent with the goals and visions of the community? I suggest it's not completely about the need to change the code, but chiefly to actually follow the existing code, comp plan, citywide plan, and other planning documents, such as Littleton's downtown design standards and guidelines. If all these planning documents were taken seriously, would we be here today? For example, recently the Planning Board heard a PDO request for the redevelopment of the Old Valley Feedland, which is a B2 property not a part of this present moratorium. Well, a few of the members referenced the code, comp plan, citywide plan, and design standards and guidelines, showing exactly why the PDO is not consistent with the goals and vision of the community, which is the entire purpose of this B2 moratorium. The majority of the board overlooked the documents, even though Code 10-9-5 specifically states the development must be compliant with the citywide and neighborhood design goals and objectives. Unfortunately, except for one, the city planners didn't mention these major problems in their analysis. I called city planning a week ago to learn their thoughts, and I'm still waiting for them to call me back. I'd love to read the list of all the problems with this PDO concerning the very reason a B2 moratorium was enacted. I can't, there's only 3 minutes. I'm not against the proposed changes to the B2. In fact, I'm for them, but they will not fix the problem. Littleton's code, comp plan, citywide plan, and planning documents, such as the downtown design standards and guidelines, already should prevent many of the B2 problems, with one exception, and that's the need to codify community character in a more objective manner. But since we know this is not presently happening, more needs to be done. Perhaps lower the FAR and the residential use allowance, or add height restrictions or setbacks, or have it go to council after the planning board. But first and foremost, adhering to our present code and planning documents, as mentioned above, is essential. Otherwise, how can we honor Code 4-6-2? The council finds the pressures of population growth and development may result in the destruction, impairment, or drastic alteration of the buildings, structures, and areas important to the city's cultural, historic, and architectural heritage. It is further found that the prevention of needless destruction and impairment and the attentive preservation of the city's cultural, historic, and architectural heritage is essential to the public health, safety, and welfare. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Don Burns and Cal Murb is on deck.
Good evening, Council. Don Burns, District 4. Council no doubt noticed that public comment at the Planning Board's August 22nd meeting recognized the pleasing architectural aesthetics of the development it approved for Valley Feed property at 2679 West Main Street. If so, you also know that despite the architecture, it's in the wrong place. 3 board members and several citizens gave ample reasons for disapproval, including its large, bulky mass, high profile, and poor fit, its congesting effect on already problematic traffic at the west end of Maine's S-curve, and limited downtown parking space. As the PDO was predicated on hoped-for variances from the city code, convincing rationale justifying their necessity was conspicuously absent. Most puzzling was the board majority's greater interest in accommodating developer wishes than reworking the design to meet the city's code, comp plan, and design standards. After all, that wasn't impossible. Ordinance 13 would do nothing to curb nonconforming developments like that just approved because it still does not address objectively defined community character metrics and perhaps not even the city's zoning regulations. Chapter 8, Section 10.8.1, subsection A of the city's zoning regulations states, the proposed use at the size and intensity contemplated and at the proposed location will provide a development that is necessary or desirable for and compatible with the neighborhood and/or the community. In the face of the Grove's monstrous scale and code infractions, we heard council acknowledge its dilemma. Wasn't prevention of recurrence the moratorium's purpose? Yet the proposed ordinance backs away from critically important open space setback and building height restrictions that city staff first attempted to address. Failing to objectively address specific community character metrics, the proposal seems to equate conditional use with subject to board approval, nothing more. And if the board majority saw fit in approving the Valley Feed proposal, why would anyone expect it to do anything different under this proposed ordinance? Also, there are no objective criteria for those 7 conditional use determination factors listed in the staff communication. They are only topics, all of which then begs asking, why doesn't the city of Littleton finally adopt an objective community character system? The good news is that such a system already exists and could readily be adopted to inventory both existing community character conditions as well as those citizens want, plan to maintain those that optimize citizens' desired outcomes, and finally, incorporate those objective provisions within appropriate zoning codes. Thank you very much, and I have a longer version than 3 minutes, and there's 8 copies here, 1 for each council member and 1 for staff.
Thank you, Don. Cal Murab and Mickey Kempf is on deck. Cal, you have 3 minutes.
Good evening, council members, Mr. Mayor, and fellow citizens. I wish I could speak as fast as these folks do. I'm speaking tonight as someone who loves this country and especially the city for what it has given me as a transplant from Lebanon. Littleton has transformed slowly over the past 37 years since I have been living and conducting business in this wonderful community. I became part of the city and have given back to the community and continue to do so by creating good-paying jobs and bringing successful businesses, one that cater to what our citizen needs to make it stronger, prosperous, competitive with our surrounding communities. Your decision could have a tremendous negative impact and affect the growth and the future of this beautiful community we now live in and for generations to come. Please don't let your decision be unethical and have a detrimental effect on what can be a thriving community. I know we have here some of our citizens who are opposed to any growth, prosperity, or development. Do not disregard the quiet majority who love and support this community by investing their hard-earned money, chart their future, their dreams, and raise their families, and who call this wonderful city home. To my friends and citizens of this city, the quiet majority, please let your voice be heard by writing or calling the city council for where you'd like to see the city future. A stagnation nation or part of the large metro community that we are part of. I can't help but remember what a sleepy town Littleton was through the 80s and the 90s. Main Street would be shut down by 5 p.m. and there would be nobody walking the streets either on the weekends. Nowadays, I see professionals, families, and lovers strolling down Main Street wide sidewalks during the days, evening, weekends, and holidays. For the past 25 years, I have been a big proponent of high-density residential, as this will improve our community services, encourage businesses, and bring younger and affluent new faces to our city. Small business is the backbone of this country. Please encourage it. Do not hinder it. Thank you. I did it in less than 3 minutes.
Good job, Cal.
Thank you. Mickey Kempf and Carol Fays on deck. Okay, thank you. Carol.
I'm just going to speak to you without reading anything. The idea of conditional and letting that rest on the shoulders of the planning board or commission makes me nervous as a citizen because of the experience I had when I went before the planning board twice about the Oak Brook proposed assisted living center. What I saw, and that was my first time really experiencing city government close up. What it seemed like is that the people that I thought were part of the developer's staff were actually the City of Littleton's staff. So they clearly had a very close relationship already before that board. Another thing I saw was that the planning board really didn't understand, I don't think, and I'm not taking a shot at them, but I don't think that they had looked at the documents that we citizens studied and studied and studied because we were defending things as they were. Things like numbers changing from one side of the plan to the other side of the plan in order to make the building look shorter by the end of the document. What I hate to see is there being the possibility of the developer being able to pressure either staff or the planning board by the conditional state of things. It's much better for us citizens if things are in writing and that if code is followed rather than, again, another rather than, the things being kind of up in the air, which is what conditional use means, which gives the developer the expectation, I think, that there's a lot of wiggle room. And then that gives the people who are making the decisions, that puts them in the situation of having to perhaps wiggle a little too much. It also puts the citizens in a situation where they don't know. We didn't know what we were trying to do. And it's kind of inside out, that the citizens are left on the outside of how things work. And when the purpose of code is to defend property rights and how things can proceed in a predictable way. So that's a messy way of saying all that you can do to make things certain and tack them down. And I think to a great extent they already are with the existing code. The proposed change to B2 makes it squishier and more uncertain for everyone, and I think more likely that unpredictable things will happen, which isn't really to everyone's good. Thank you.
Thank you. That completes everybody I have on my list. Is there anyone who did not sign and would like to speak? I'm going to close the public hearing at 7:35. Does council have any questions of staff that may have come up during the public hearing? And if we don't have that, we ask for a motion and a second, and we could have further discussion. Any questions?
So, Mr. Chair, I move to approve on second reading the ordinance amending Title 10 of the City Code concerning residential uses in the B2 zone district and repealing the moratorium.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Do we have further discussion?
Yes. Oh. To the maker, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Just a couple of comments. One is, as Director Mills mentioned, this is not dealing entirely with all the codes and ordinances that we have, and that project is continued. And the comment that it doesn't fix everything in its entirety is true, because the project of codes and ordinances is yet to hit us. What we were dealing with is a shorter term issue on this. One, two is to recognize the property rights that exist for property owners wherever they may be. And at least in my reading of this, it adds a public process to the residential use within the B2 zone, if there is none that exists there now. And I don't see it as liberalizing any of the other requirements as I would see them. Does it hit as hard on some of the issues? Probably not at this point in time, but I think it is very directionally fine, and at least according to the city attorney, puts us in a fine position where there are no takings involved with regard existing property owners. So, Councilmember Clark?
Oh, hold on, Jerry. Go ahead.
I didn't know whether Doug had...
I can direct him.
He's the director.
I can direct.
Okay, so I have a question for the community director. If you could come on down, please. So, as I had asked earlier, a developer can come in with some residential at their property up to, was it 50% now, or what is the percent? So if they want to make it 60%, they can still come in and ask for a variance or a conditional code or something as it is today. Is that correct? And before you answer that, I'm thinking of Nevada Place, where we had approved that some time ago for 60-some units. And over the years, they've come in and changed it, I think, twice now. Is there anything to prevent a developer from doing that today? Just to come in and say, I would really like 60% instead of the 50% and go through our process to get approval?
Are there any other options? Well, it just depends. So depending on the size of the property, perhaps they could come through and rezone it to something else that would allow maybe a different mix. That's always an option, but that would depend on the size of it and what zone they would want to be in. As you know, in the PDO process, that can't change the underlying density. So I don't think that would be an option.
So with this ordinance 13, then, this allows them to come in automatically, would say that's 60 or 65% residential units.
No. The ordinance in front of you this evening does not change the 50%. The 50% would still be the same scenario. So anything in B2 under the straight zoning, if there was a residential component, it could be no larger than 50% of the structure. What the ordinance does is it further clarifies what's residential versus what is not residential.
Thank you.
Did that help?
Yes, appreciate it, thank you.
Mr. Director?
Yes, you can. Got any questions or comments?
Yes, the reason I seconded this ordinance is I believe it's a very small step in the right direction, but it doesn't get us to where we need to be and why it is that we created the moratorium in the first place. I have passed out to all of you a proposed amendment to this. And the net effect of the proposed amendment is to take out residential as a use in B2. So this amendment limits itself to B2 and residential use, which satisfies the issues that the city attorney raised in her confidential memo. But we've got a couple issues here. One is, contrary to what the Planning Commission says, mixing residential to commercial has a much more dramatic effect than other conditional uses for both the commercial and the residential. I got a call this last week from somebody that was complaining about noise north of Littleton Boulevard. I don't know if he called the rest of you. There was a house north of the 7-Eleven on Cedar at Littleton Boulevard that was partying into late at night. I can remember when David Swenson, who at that time owned Merle's, wanted to do a pig roast and band party every Friday evening till 2 o'clock in the morning. And he was upset that he had to go through the permit process. And the reason he had to go through the permit process is there's people that actually live downtown. So mixing commercial to residential affects the residential people because they have concerns about commercial operations that affect their ability to live peacefully. And it also affects commercial establishments because when you introduce residential into commercial establishments, then there's concerns from the residential people about trash collection at 4 o'clock in the morning, issues that don't happen if the entire area is commercial. But the part that the Planning Commission missed, and frankly the staff missed, is converting commercial to residential impacts our ability to generate revenue in the city. And right now, with what we have and with the proposed change that's in front of us, we can have all of our B2, 49% of all of our B2 converted into residential and lose that commercial and retail generation component of it. So I believe the same as apparently Mr. Beckman believes, that when you transform a use from commercial to residential, that rises to the level of a rezone. And to give the example of Nevada Place came back for rezones. They came back to modify the PD plan, which was a rezone that came in front of the council. That's exactly the way that it should happen. Right now, what we have, both without this ordinance and with this ordinance as it's written, is it doesn't come to council. A property owner can transform up to half of his property into residential use. We can lose that commercial floor space, that retail floor space, and we have no say into it. I believe that that transformation rises to the level of requiring a rezone. We have a very well-established rezone process. We've done rezones many times in the past, and I'm proposing an amendment that's in front of you. I move that we amend the proposed ordinance and change line 45 of page 1 of the proposed ordinance to take out the words "and B2." Also to delete lines 11 through 13 on page 2 of the proposed ordinance, is the language that creates the conditional use. And to remove the R designation from the land use table on line 3.66 in section 10-3-2, which would prevent residential use in B2.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? I will second it. We have a motion and a second to amend the ordinance that has been presented to us with the changes presented in written form here to amend the proposed ordinance, and we have changed line 45 of page 1 of the proposed ordinance to read non-residential uses in B1 districts, provided the following conditions have been met. 2, delete lines 11 through 12 on page 2 of the proposed ordinance. And then 3, section 10.3.2366 is hereby amended as follows. That's the land use table. And that would remove R from the designation under land use zone district B2. Discussion. I'll talk about why I seconded it. There just seems to be a tendency when we talk about some of these things to immediately say you're not interested in growth, development, prosperity, and those kinds of things. And that's a way to provide a way to take the discussion away from what the real argument is. The argument here is we have a land use program in the city of Littleton. Is it working to our community's benefit? And if it isn't, does it need to be modified? I think what has happened recently up at Bemis and the Boulevard is an example of a process that did not satisfy the expectations of the community to be transparent and in the public. And that's what zoning does. Zoning puts it transparent and in the public, and it takes a little bit of work, a little bit of initiative from the developer, but it means that the community's involved. When we allowed the current B2 to have the number of changes in it, administrative type changes and interpretations that I honestly have to tell you I didn't see coming, and I'm sitting here as a council member, then we haven't done what is in the public's interest. And when we allow something as significant to the future of this community as changing what is designated to be commercial land, which is how we survive. We survive through retail sales tax, 60%. When we take it and make a decision that we're going to change it by putting into those commercial structures residential units, we do create a potential threat to the ability of that to develop the kind of commercial that we need in order to survive. That's very much interested in the future of this community and its prosperity. And finally, when I talk about what happened up at the Grove, many of those things could have been handled very well in a zoning process. I think the issue was it had previously, a couple of years earlier, come forward in a very similar package, and the community and the council and the planning board had said it didn't really fit what we wanted for that area. And a way was found to create almost the same thing by not doing it through zoning. I don't like that. I think that's not what the public expects or wants. It creates confusion, it creates problems, and we don't end up with the best we can get in Littleton. We need to get the best we can get. Council needs to be involved, and it needs to be a zoning matter. I don't want to leave decisions about the best we can get for the future of Littleton to administrative decisions or the planning board when, as been pointed out, perhaps our procedures, policies, plans, and land use isn't necessarily considered. So I'd like to get it to council where it belongs. Debbie.
Couple of comments. I think, when someone's going to develop a piece of property and they're going to do it based on their use by right, it's a property rights issue. And I think that that's in many ways what becomes problematic. The property owner has a right to do what they want to do within the law, and that may not be what some in the community want. That is not something that we fix here. Property rights are not something we change or fix here. And I would say in terms of the Grove, yeah, there were people in the community that didn't like that development. They didn't like the process, and
sued the city and have continued to show their dissatisfaction. That's public process. That's their rights to do that. There are also a number of people in the community who like the development, who are looking forward to the new neighbors that will bring, and the folks that will be able to now enjoy our community walking down to downtown without having to access vehicles, take advantage of our light rail station, et cetera, become meaningful neighbors and community members. So I think that and there's probably even the largest portion of the population that doesn't even know what the Grove is at this point. I am not going to support this amendment because I don't support the idea that eliminating retail in the B2 is a good idea at all. When you say commercial, I keep hearing your references to retail in that. Commercial doesn't necessarily mean retail. There are a lot of B2 areas that do not would not serve as a proper place for retail establishment at all. And some of the B2 that we have would serve well as retail if there was more residential around it. Residential is what drives retail. There's a reason why we don't have a lot of the type of retail that we want in this community, and it is because of the way that our land is laid out and the way that we have a lot of spaces with no rooftops. And you hear that all the time, particularly with people that, people have great ideas about what kind of amenities they'd like to see go in down on the west side. And we have over 900 acres of park that provides no rooftop. So that creates a problem for the Trader Joe's of this world, et cetera. So I don't believe that eliminating residential solves any problems. In fact, I think it eventually would create problems. And I also believe that I think that we need to think of commercial in larger terms. Commercial can be a real estate office. That produces no retail sales tax. Commercial can be a construction office. That also doesn't produce any retail sales. So if our intention is to just invigorate retail sales, then I think that's a much bigger picture. That's a much larger plan, and that involves a lot more than just looking at B2 zoning.
Additional comments? Bill.
There are a couple of things. First of all, this includes B1, removing residential from B1, and I don't believe that B1 has been properly noticed. Is that correct? Or because we sent letters to property owners in B2, did we send them to B1s?
Well, the proposed amendment doesn't remove residential from B1. It's only dealing with B2.
Okay. All right. So I stand corrected there. One of the issues here is that we have B2s all over the city. I took a zoning map of the city and highlighted it today, and they're scattered along Littleton Boulevard. They're scattered along Broadway. Columbine Square is B2. The lower part of Main Street between Curtis and the Melting Pot is B2. And they're not similar animals. I mean, what works in one may not work in another. What you may want in one may be different. And as we work through the zoning process, it'll be interesting to see. And I would suspect that they may come in and say that these really ought to be different zones. The removal of residential is, as you said, Doug, it's a reaction to the Grove. And I don't think it's very well thought out beyond that. I think that there were some issues with the Grove, and I share in those concerns. But I don't think that we should just broad scale it. One thing that we need to look at is downtown and the comp plan, and I respectfully disagree with the Community Development Department that when the comp plan says increasing housing diversity and densities to help enliven the streets and support the stores and restaurants, that's in the comp plan. That says residential should be in those areas. And it also provides a consumer base within walking distance. It's a walkable community. And that's a big part of what is going on in the evolution of cities right now. It is worldwide that retail sales are declining. on storefronts because people buy so much stuff over the internet. So it becomes an increasing challenge to bring retail sales taxes per square foot out of any storefront. So one way they're doing that is to bring walkable neighborhoods. Look at Lodo. And we are certainly a different animal, but they have residential up, retail down. You can have commercial up, meaning office, I would suppose. We know that two-story retail doesn't work particularly well unless it's a shopping center. But not allowing retail up actually discourages reinvestment and redevelopment. And the reason is that right now in this economy, in this world, the profit is in residential development. A developer is more reluctant to develop retail because of declining retail sales. The office markets can flux either way, but one way we can leverage that desire to build residential is require retail on the ground floor or to have those kinds of needs spelled out, but it requires that you have residential. It is also makes a lot of sense in today's world to move people into downtowns because it makes walkable cities that diminish traffic. If people walk to their stores, walk to their barber, walk to the bank, I office downtown, I never get in my car all day. I don't live close enough to walk. Well, I do, but I don't. But if you don't have to get in your car to do those things, it diminishes traffic. That's what we're looking at, is having places that people can walk. AARP endorses walkable communities. So the elimination of retail and community cores is not good city planning, and it does increase your retail take. And that's where the economics of it work out, and that's been shown across the country. So there are alternatives to this. I think that, with the Grove thing, we talked about fixing the garage interpretation. I mean, that was an Achilles heel on that, and that could be addressed. We could install buffers in transition zones where a B2 comes right up against an R zone. We could do overlays and public outreach to get those, and those have been done in Lakewood. They've been done. Oklahoma City did a marvelous job with that, and Lenexa, Kansas. We could simply put design guidelines in, and those are adapted by area so that you wouldn't have a different impact or the same impact on all B2s all over the city. They'd be tailored to the use in a specific area, which this proposal does not do. This is too broad spread. So we need to encourage good land use planning, which is walkable neighborhoods with people in them and increase that vitality. And that's why I think residential is not only something that you need to have, but you need to encourage. And as we work through the design or the zoning review, I think there are a lot of things that need to be addressed. I agree with that totally, but I don't think this is the way to do it because it's too broad a scope. It has unintended consequences and casualties along the way. As you look at all these different areas where the B2 can go in. So I won't support the amendment.
Comments? Phil?
Just a real quick one. As we take a look at some of the areas that are currently B2, there's some things that exist in other places in the metro region that are mixed use, where there is a commercial use and residential shared in the same structure. And something that I think is really neat, and it's kind of worked out pretty well, is the old Elitch's neighborhood. And what this would do is prohibit that mixed use in areas where something like that may make a lot of sense, because it would bring additional residential units to where we sorely need some of them to support the potential for even retail use, which is a big part of that Elitch's old neighborhood that's there. And I oppose the amendment.
Doug?
I'd like to clarify some things. What this does would require a rezone if somebody wanted to build something like the old Elitch's. Because right now, the council has no control over residential use in B2, either with the current legislation the way it is, or with the proposal without this amendment, because it doesn't go to council. So when Bill's talking about being able to negotiate a retail component on the first floor, we don't have that ability unless we have some lever to do that with, and without a rezone, we don't have that lever. And the way the code is written now, and the way the ordinance is proposed, without this amendment, we still don't have that lever. And as Bill pointed out, we've got B2 all over the city, and developers make more money developing residential than they do commercial. So we are basically setting the example with the Grove. We have set a precedent with the way we interpret code with a number of B2 properties, and some of them are significant in size and sitting on the doorstep for development, and without forcing that to go through a rezone, which is appropriate when you're transforming a business into residential, we basically have no control over that property because it never gets to council. Even the proposed amendment, the proposed ordinance from the staff doesn't get to council. So there is no lever for negotiation. There is no negotiation that happens because it's all supposedly use by right.
Additional comments?
Just to go on to that, we can go retail down. I suggested that we consider having a retail down, a retail only on the main street level throughout downtown. But that was, I think it was planning board and council. Most people did not favor that in the room. That's a way to get retail sales taxes and really enhance the community character. It's a way that you drive retail sales and really get the culture intact. So that is a way that could be done. It's a complex approach, and that's part of saying that this is a knee-jerk fix. I don't think it was well thought out. It's a little bit reckless, actually, the way it's gone about, because it applies citywide, and I don't think we can anticipate those uses across the city.
Well, I think any other comments from council? Okay, we have a motion and a second. I've made my comments. I won't add anything additional other than we're dealing with a desire and a reality. I don't think there's much difference in what we desire among members of council for the future of downtown Littleton and the future of our buildings and our neighborhoods, our respect for the citizens and all that. The reality is we just have some ordinances that are going to be twisted all around, and we won't get to what we really want unless we begin to face them and make some decisions. And I feel like this moratorium was an attempt to address that. I think we're not where we wanted to be in doing that. And in reality, what was proposed by Councilmember Clark is the closest to really dealing with the reality, in my opinion, and that's why I seconded it. Ready for a vote? This will be a vote on the amendment, which I read previously. It's in writing, given to each of us. There are 3 portions of it. I don't think I need to read it again. City Attorney, shall I read it again prior to the vote?
Does council need it read again?
I don't.
No.
Everybody has it. Everybody has a copy of it. It's been read once. So we have the amendment to the ordinance that we have a previous motion and second to, and that is what we are voting on. We're voting on the amendment proposed by Councilmember Clark. Ready to vote?
The vote is 3 in favor with Councilmember Brinkman, Councilmember Valdez, Councilmember Cernanek, and Councilmember Hopping voting no. The motion fails. 3 to 4.
Okay, that brings us back to the original ordinance that's under consideration. We have a motion and a second, and we were doing discussion for it. At this point, I think we may have some additional discussion on the ordinance. Anyone?
Mayor, I have a question before we do that.
Go right ahead.
We were handed a version 7A at the beginning of council meeting. What is the difference between that and what was in our packet?
There were 3 typos,
Okay.
and I fixed them.
I assume they weren't significant.
They were not.
Okay, that's why you call it a typo.
Okay, I've got a comment then on this. I think that, again, we're struggling with a B2 zone that becomes modified by a paragraph in our land use code. And the land use modification addresses residential in a local business zone district, B2 zoned local district. One of the characteristics of that requires that the commercial and residential be combined in a structure if the residential is going to be incorporated into it, and that is a key part of what we're discussing here. Any other comments? Ready for a vote?
Mr. Mayor, I would just encourage once again that anytime you come in and put another burden to filling the comp plan, which is to encourage that pedestrian active street and increasing the housing diversity and densities, you are discouraging redevelopment in your community and reinvestment in the community. And this is discriminatory against landlords and building owners who want to develop residential up, which is the buying power fuel. What you're doing is you're bringing the supply to the demand when you bring people into a downtown area. That's why areas like, Lodo have succeeded. Main Street already has significant residential usage upstairs on second floors, and it's grandfathered in there. And once again, to do this throughout the city at the areas, if you look at the B2 zoning map, it looks like they were dropped out of airplanes instead of purposely put down. So one size doesn't fit all, and I would suggest that our best move is to do nothing on this to remove the moratorium, but to vote no on the ordinance.
So that brings to mind a question. If you would like to vote no on the ordinance, but you want to repeal the moratorium.
I'd make a motion after the defeat of this.
Sorry?
If that would be the will of council to vote against the ordinance, I would then make a motion to repeal the ordinance.
You make a
Or
motion.
not, I'm sorry, repeal the moratorium.
Make the motion first.
So that
The ordinance, what's before you, proposes to do away with the moratorium and pass the proposed ordinance. If you do nothing, the moratorium goes away on September 12th anyway.
If that's the case, that's fine. We can let it expire, or if you want to be deliberate and do it tonight, I'd do that as well.
I'll remind the council that the moratorium passes emergency ordinance by a majority on council. So it's rather unusual to pass a moratorium to fix something and then vote against all possible fixes. But
This is not all possible fixes.
before September 12th it is.
Not that we've ever done anything unusual.
I call the question.
My point exactly.
That's good.
question's been called. Are you ready to vote?
The vote is 3 in favor with Councilmember Cole, Councilmember Brinkman, and Councilmember Cernanik and Hopping voting no. The motion fails 3-4.
That's an interesting vote.
Okay, it is 8:10. We have a ways to go. I'd like to call a break for 10 minutes, and then we can come back. We should be back on the air. It's 8:20, we just finished our break. Okay, we are still working our way down the ordinances for second reading and public hearing. On our agenda, we're at item B, which is ordinance 14-2016. This is an ordinance on second reading amending Chapter 1 and Chapter 12 of Title 10 of the City Code regarding mailed notice for development applications that require public hearing before the Planning Board or City Council. The staff member presenting this will be Jocelyn Mills, our Community Development Director.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So yes, this is the hearing for adding a provision for mailed notice into our code that would require any application that comes before either the planning board or city council to provide mailed written notice to adjacent property owners. And again, this is the second reading, and planning board heard it at their July 22nd. That's it in a nutshell. Mailed notice for development applications that require a public hearing. And as background, we did have a conversation at your joint study session with Planning Board relative to this topic. And we also had an open house, and information has been posted on Littleton plans. Currently, the code does not have a requirement for mailed public notice. Adding such provision will enable more transparency and awareness about pending land use applications. Based on community input during the open house, the recommendation is notice within 500 feet of a development application. Planning Board did add a provision that to increase that up to 1,000 feet in cases where a project may have a larger impact. So that's it. PDOs, PDPs, rezoning, conditional use, and plan development overlays. All public hearings would require this written notice, and the applicant would be required to submit a map, addresses, and an affidavit that it would be mailed, that the notice was mailed 10 days prior. This is similar to in the code today. We have a provision that requires applicants that come before for public hearing to post the property with a sign. They pick up the sign from the city office, they post it, and they provide us an affidavit. So this would just be an additional public notice element to development applications, and it's very common to require mailed notice in other jurisdictions. The code outlined 500 feet as the buffer. So I just wanted to provide you with a couple of slides that would show you generally what that would look like if we were wanting to, say, change the Littleton Center, I don't know, to my retail shop. I would have to notice, yes, I'd have to notice that would be the 500 feet radius. This would be 1,000 foot, so that means hard to kind of see, but that would be the difference. And then lastly, both of them are shown there. Just
a question while that slide is up. Is it 500 or 1,000 feet from the exterior of the building? And is that why this circle is irregular?
no, it would be from the property line.
From the property line, okay.
Yeah.
From the exterior of the property line.
Correct. Yes. So that's it in a nutshell, and I can answer any questions you might have.
Do we have questions for Director Mills? Debbie?
Well, two things. One, would you put back up the 500? And I don't even know if this is possible, and it doesn't need to, but it was something like that. And I think of particularly maybe in areas where there's large open space. 500 doesn't, 500 feet here, the people on the other side of the railroad are not included because the railroad takes up so much space. So is there consideration for, or has it ever been done where it's more about then you minus the unused land, the open space or right away, so that it's not part of the 500 feet, which would then allow you to encompass more of the neighborhoods? Because the intention is to get it into property owners' homes.
That's correct.
Otherwise, I mean, you could go to the 1,000 and probably do that, but that could also be overkill in some places too.
Right, but currently that is, here, just to show you. The code is written so that in those instances where it could have a larger impact, so this could be a really good example for that. The 500 feet gets you the railroad tracks. If you do the 1,000, then you are getting those neighbors on the other side of the railroad tracks.
Okay. So then it could be either the 500 or the 1,000, depending on, okay. So then this is probably getting in the weeds, and if this did pass, I would just suggest that there be some very, very clear notification on the envelope, and I would suggest not doing postcards, simply because I think it's important enough. We need people to open this up. The last couple times that I've done mailings, particularly with the mineral station or the mineral traffic plan, that the postcards just tend to be ignored because they just look like another postcard from Quest. Yeah. So this is important enough, sort of like when we get our sewer bill, scary sewer bill inside, open now, right? So I think that would be important so that people know that this is something different than junk mail. And that's, if this passes, that's just a suggestion. I just was thinking about it, so I said it.
That's like building a better mousetrap. It's just not going to happen.
Councilmember Cole.
So I have two questions, so I'll do them one at a time. So how do you define impact?
How do you define impact? I actually using Debbie's example in the Littleton Center is probably a very good one, recognizing that in this case, the Littleton Center and 500 feet doesn't get you to a lot of the adjacent property owners, because that is the intention behind this, is that you are providing notice to the neighbors to let them know that there's an application that is coming to their neighborhood so that they can be aware of it and be prepared if they so want to get involved in that.
No, I understand that part, but if this is saying it has greater impact, what's the impact? Is it, for example, I'm going to be silly here. Is it, for example, a lot of door slamming in a unit? I mean, in a multi-unit building? Is it amount of light that's polluting the nighttime sky? Is it the smell of whatever people are cooking in their residences? I mean, what increases impact?
Yes, I would agree with the intensity of the use would lead to that, and it would just have to be evaluated based on the application. Okay. So an impact could be, yes, if it along Littleton Boulevard, we've been talking about that in B2, let's just say another proposal comes forward and it appears that the impact to that area will be adding, 100 residential units and 100,000 square feet of commercial space. That potentially has a bigger impact, so that you would say the requirement would be 1,000 foot that they would notice that, versus, let's just say on another property further down on Littleton Boulevard, they're only going to, would be half of that. The proposal really is consistent with other buildings along the strip. And so we would say, oh, well, that looks like, the impact is less because it generally is in line with what was historically there versus something that perhaps is bigger than what was historically provided for in that area.
Okay. And my second question is, would we notify the property owner, the occupant, or both?
The requirement would be that the developer, the applicant, would mail to property owners.
So if the property owner didn't care to notify his tenant or whoever, then that's just too bad.
It's generally harder to find tenant addresses, whereas...
Say again?
I said it's generally much harder to find tenant addresses. We don't necessarily keep HOAs on file and other things. It is fairly standard and easy to find property owners, and hopefully those property owners, if they wanted to, but it would be up to them, that's correct, to
Well,
pass
when
the
we-
information on to tenants.
I think, although I may be wrong, when we had urban renewal meetings, we centrally sent stuff to addresses, not to the names of people occupying an address.
I think generally if you just send something to occupant, they tend to not pay attention to it as much. So really it is important to mail it to a person. But I hear you and recognize that there still would be other ways that rental tenants would find information. You know, the property itself will still have the public notice sign. And as you also know, on the city's website, it's now called our development activity list. But through that mechanism and portal, you can find any project under review. Granted, it's not an actual notice to someone, but there are other ways to find out information.
So part of what you were illustrating, though, with the picture is an area where some people might access their property, where they live, whatever, from a way that isn't on the route where the big notice is put up. I mean, just the weird way they get to their property.
Yes, if you are correct, perhaps not everyone that lives there, if they're a renter, would know through this mechanism about a pending application. Hopefully, we would get more than what we are today.
Thank you.
So in that scenario, would you, because you have the discretion of 500 or 1,000 feet, right?
Correct.
In this
The way
scenario-
it's currently written, that's correct.
So in this scenario, you would have it go to 1,000 feet?
Yes.
And let's take a property like Marathon. So does it just go to Littleton residents or all areas outside?
It would be anyone within that boundary.
Okay, thank you.
Phil?
Yes, thank you. Director Mills, what's proposed before us says first-class mail, and it requires the notice to the landowners be included, trying to address Councilmember Brinkman's question about an envelope. First-class mail doesn't necessarily just correspond to the postage that's there. Is that going to be an envelope required with that first-class mail, according to this?
Yes, I did not bring an example of it, but we already have, if it's passed, we do have a template of what that would look like, and it would be on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper that would be required to be put in an envelope.
Right, and it says to use the applicable county assessor's office. What happens if there's a property that's in transition and the county assessor's office is not necessarily accurate on a particular date?
It's the best effort at that moment in time, and I agree there may be some misses, but the intention would be that if at all possible, we would get notice to everyone, if not quite everyone, but all current owners. But you're right, there may be some kind of in transition missteps.
Somebody else will throw it away.
Thank you.
Bill?
Just a question on the expansion from 500 to 1,000 feet based on your discretion. It pops to mind, does that put pressure on staff? Because every proposal is really important to somebody. So if you say 500 on one and 1,000 on another, don't you run a risk that the 500-foot people are going to say, or the ones that are outside that 500 feet and within 1,000 going to come back and say, why didn't I get 1,000 feet? I mean, would it be simpler and remove potential conflict if we settled on a number and just made it fit for all circumstances? I don't care if it's 500 feet or 1,000 feet or 7 miles, but it seems giving you that discretion, or the department the discretion, sets up conflict, and seems like one application is being treated in a different way than another.
Yes, and recognizing the idea here is to provide notice that we don't currently have. The proposal was to have that opportunity. But I would leave it to you all as policymakers. If you think at our first go-around of providing written notice, it would be better to have a number, then let's do it. Because the intention here is really to up our game, if you will, on providing notice to the community on what is happening in their area of influence.
Correct. And I favor getting people direct notice. I think that's really a good idea. I'm just wondering if it wouldn't, the council shouldn't consider making it consistent so that one person, you know, if you live 750 feet away, and somebody else got a notice because they're in 1,000 and you didn't. I think that's a little bit.
I mean, on some level, you're always going to have that, whether it's an actual number or we provide this discretion. There is potentially always someone just outside that boundary.
Right.
And, you know, we just do the best we can, and we hope that neighbors talk to each other and communicate so that, you know what I mean, that you have that level too. But you're right, there's always that potential to miss someone.
So,
Peggy, go
I have another question. So this is requiring the mailing if something is a public hearing before planning board or council. Now, some things wouldn't come to one or the other, I guess, but if they come to both, will there be a notice? Will the notice say, and you can't necessarily easily do this, because if planning board has a hearing and then continues it, as been done at least once on a really big one, I think, in the past, then how will people know that?
Well, it'll depend on timing, and you're right, but I can foresee a lot of times people will actually receive two notices, one for the planning board hearing and then one for the council hearing.
Okay, I mean, that is good in my mind. I appreciate the additional expense of that, so as long as we have an understanding on that, thank you.
Debbie.
Is expense picked up by the developer for these mailings?
Yes.
Any more questions from council for Jocelyn? Okay, thank you very much. It's a second reading and a public hearing. I will open the public hearing at 8:38 in the evening. I have one name on the list, but I don't see the person in the room. It was Pam. Oh, Pam's here. Pam? You were hiding behind the other person there. Pam, you have 3 minutes.
Still Pam Chadbourne, live a block and a half from here. So what I would like to do is commend a couple of you for your comments and encourage you to amend this to require those. Councilmember Brinkman brought up removing rights-of-way and other kinds of non-specific property or government-owned property, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, I'll remind you that we did that in the urban renewal plans, or we could have or should have or maybe didn't or did, depending on which one you read when. So we can totally do that, and I think we should. That's a good consideration. So it should be amended to implement getting rid of those kind of public spaces or others so that all property owners who are directly impacted by the development are notified. Also, I believe that Councilmember Cole's suggestion to notify occupants as well as owners is essential. Of course, the tenants are the ones who are going to be very impacted by some kinds of development. In fact, what if they're for it? What if they say, gee, I want a store, or I want, a lot more neighbors or something? So, and often they're the ones who have the least resources to adapt to change. Council, I think as public servants, you must consider their need. They are the people with the least ability to respond, and so they should be people that you want to have notified. Also, I'm quite sure other municipalities require this, kind of like the impact fees. Boy, we're late to this party. So again, as public servants, let's notify people of developments in their immediate proximity. And I think the language should also specifically say this applies to all properties, whether they're in Littleton or not, whether it's in the city limits or not. Again, an excellent point. This is the least you can do, council, so please do it. Thanks.
Thank you. I don't have any other names on the list. Okay, with that, we're complete with the public hearing at 8:41. At this point, we need a motion and a second in order to proceed.
So can I ask a question before that? So if it's mailed to the occupant, what occupant would it be mailed to? Sometimes you've got two non-related adults sharing a unit. Sometimes you've got even more than that, whatever. So I'm not totally sure if we try to meet the issue that Pam's raised of how do we do that? We just go to an address and hope whoever's living there shares it with each other?
I would suggest just an address.
Okay, so that's just clarifying. So as long as we've got it clarified in our record, so.
Jocelyn, any comment on that?
Sorry, I just wasn't sure if you had a question for me, but I would agree you would mail it to the address, and it would go to whoever gets the mail at that address, the occupant.
But that's not what this, we're just sending it to the property owner at this point.
Currently, as it's written, it's just property owner.
Move to approve on second reading the ordinance amending Chapter 1 and Chapter 12 of Title 10 of the City Code regarding mailed notice for development applications that require public hearings before Planning Board or City Council.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion.
Who seconded? Phil? The seconder? Okay.
Discussion. Any further discussion? Phil?
Yeah, I'm going to put in an amendment here to use 700 feet rather than allowing for discretion. By the use of 700 feet, it actually doubles the area that would be addressed from 500 feet area, as opposed to the 1,000 feet, which actually quadruples the area. And the reason in part for that is it gives us one item, it takes away the discretion so that it can't be argued with. Second piece, someone can always argue with it because I think there's been a rather consistent surveying of our citizens as well as commentary that's come before us dealing with impacts of traffic so that folks can talk about where they live, wherever they may live in the city, being impacted by traffic. And I would like to now make an amendment to take away the 500 versus 1,000 and make it a standard 700 feet.
Second.
Beat you.
And flip it.
We have a motion and a second to amend the ordinance in front of us to eliminate the wording 500 and eliminate the wording 1,000 and replace it just with the 700 feet. When I look at the...
If I can, Mr. Mayor?
750, wasn't it?
750?
700.
700.
Mr. Mayor, just to clarify, so in the ordinance, if this were to pass, we would, in line 35, we would change the word the number 500 to 700, and then we would strike the next sentence that.
Yes.
Exactly. But now, if you go down lower in section 2,
And there's equivalent in section 2.
it's the same type of change. We all in agreement that we understand on council what the amendment is?
Yeah, I'm, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I'm good with 1,000 feet, just plain 1,000 feet everywhere. Forget the 500 feet, just 1,000 feet. It's a good number. I like it. So, I'm not going to go for 700, but I would go for 1,000.
Any more discussion on the amendment to go to 700? I'm sorry, we have a motion and a second, so we're prepared to vote on the amendment at this time.
Yes.
Okay. Ready to vote?
Yep.
The vote is 5 in favor with Councilmember Cole and Councilmember Valdez voting no. The motion carries 5-2.
Okay, so we have a reworded amendment with that, a reworded ordinance with that amendment. It's still on the table. Is there additional discussion?
Yes, I'll propose another amendment. And that is that we modify the ordinance to mail to addresses rather than property owners.
Rather than instead of also?
Also, it'd be cumbersome.
And property owners, what if they're out of state?
Just occupant then?
Just addresses?
Just to the occupant.
Just tenants? Or
So, well, that brings up an interesting question. If we're mailing to property owners that are out of state and they're within 700 feet, then I don't know how that works.
Well, if their property is within 700 feet, I think that a property owner would, depending on what the development is, could have an impact on your property values.
Jocelyn, any thoughts? We're still trying to formulate the amendment. We haven't actually,
Yes, well, to clarify the wording of the ordinance, it would be to the property owners. So if a person lived out of state or out of country, you would have to send it to that property owner, because that's the address list that we have on file.
That actually the county assessor has on file.
Yeah, or through the county assessor, but the city has that on file, yes.
So you'd have to go to the county assessor, you'd have to find out all the properties within 700 feet, and then go to the county assessor to find the owners, and then get the addresses for the owners.
Actually, the way our GIS system is now being set up, we get that information from the counties, and so we actually will be able to produce that.
Okay.
But you're right, but through the assessor's office is where people currently can access that.
Based on that information, I move that we modify this to make it so that we're sending to property owners and occupants within 700 feet.
so we have the motion to amend this, and I haven't looked to see where
Needs a
that would be
second.
in here. We'll need a second in order to proceed. Do we have a second? Dies for lack of a second. The original is still on the consideration, and we still have a motion and a second for the amended 700-foot amended ordinance. So any further discussion of that? We ready to vote? Ready to vote?
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries unanimously.
This brings us to item C. This is ordinance 12-2016. It's an ordinance on second reading, adding Chapter 19 to Title I of the City Code, adopting an emergency management policy, be presented by one of our newest staff members, Jackie Irwin, the emergency manager.
A short presentation for you.
Sorry?
Oh, technology. Isn't it wonderful?
I can speak to it without the slides. It was just on. Well, I'll start so I don't keep you guys here forever. But my name's Jackie.
Would you talk into the mic?
Oh, my name's Jackie, and I am the newest emergency manager here in the city. And I want to thank you guys very much for the time and coming in to talk about this important subject. So the question posed today is if City Council approves the adoption of emergency management policy. I guess going back, the city has approved an emergency operations plan. That was in 2013. So what's the difference between the emergency management plan that you already adopted and the policy that I'm setting forward today? This policy that I'm presenting today is very specific to the disaster declaration process. So it defines the authority of who, how, and when a disaster declaration is issued. And then it defines the emergency orders that come under that disaster declaration. The plan, on the other hand, is really a guideline for city departments and our partners on how we're going to prepare for, respond to, and recover from disasters and emergencies. So really, if you think about a plan, a policy in general is, that's okay, I'll just do it without, if you guys are all good with that. So the policy in general is really a clear statement on how an organization is going to provide service, right? The plan then is there to put that policy into action. So you can tell by just looking at them, they're very different documents, right? But they're equally important to have in place. So, sorry, now that I don't have my slides, I'm backwards. So you might be thinking, so we've never had a plan or a policy in place before. The city's never had a policy in place before. So why now? Why should we have one now? So I was hired as the emergency manager. Part of my job description, as I understand it, is to bring the current emergency management program up to date so that we can respond in the best way possible for the community in light of a disaster. So I'm here tonight to present to you the most up-to-date information so that you can make that informed, responsible decision, keeping in mind that the economic impact on a city after a disaster can be crippling. And that having a policy with a defined authority and declaration process in place will expedite that response and mitigate that effect on both social and economic in the community. So that's my presentation in a very short manner. I'd love to hear questions if I can answer them.
Questions for Jackie? Doug?
My questions are on page 7 and 8. And I'm specifically concerned about what compensation private parties get when we commandeer their facilities and equipment. Because I don't understand what it's saying basically in paragraph 6, I guess, starting on line 17 and down. And I especially can't reconcile that with page 8, section B, where it seems to disclaim any liability that the city has for emergency operations. So, you know, if we have an emergency and we need to commandeer private property, then we need to, but I think we have a responsibility to reimburse the people whose property is commandeered. And I'm not sure that this does that, or I'm just misunderstanding the language.
Sure. So I'll point out that under section 9 is the powers under the governor's declaration. So that's at the state level. So all the paragraphs that fall under that, including 6, are through the governor's declaration at the state level. So I don't know if that addresses your question or not.
But when the governor makes that declaration, we still implement it at the local level, if I'm understanding it correctly.
I'm sorry.
Even though the governor declares an emergency, we still implement it, the response at the local level, or at least our local response we implement at the local level.
Correct.
So the governor, we could have a tornado go through an earthquake, for instance. The governor declares this area of the city or this area of the metro as a disaster area, then we go into action And if in that part of that process, we end up commandeering people's cars or facilities or something else like that. Because it says that the equipment so commandeered shall be entitled during the period of such services to all privileges, benefits, and immunities as are provided by federal and state emergency management regulations for registered emergency workers. Well, you know, if you commandeer my car, I'm glad that my car has all the privileges and rights of registered emergency workers, but, you know, I would want to get compensated for it. And it seems like paragraph B on the next page sort of disclaims any responsibility for that. And I'm guessing that this language here was taken from something else that's meaningful.
Yeah, I mean,
somewhere.
this is really a template policy that we, with the help of the city attorney, were able to adjust to for the city. I think, as you were reading through, you said something about the county and the federal government has the responsibility. So a lot of that is going to come back, and the kind of the purpose of this declaration process is to get resources and funding in return. So I don't believe that there's a liability there. Does that answer your question?
No, but that's okay.
Okay, well, it sounds like Chief might be able to answer it better.
Good evening, council. Let me try to take a stab at this for you. If the governor were to declare an emergency on a state level, there's generally federal reimbursement that comes along with that. That would allow us to pay for those resources that we may commandeer. On a more local level, if it's something that pertains to the city of Littleton that's not necessarily a state disaster, any resources that we commandeered or took over to help mitigate that disaster, we would keep track of, and we could always come back to council to seek reimbursement for those. So we handle that on a more local level versus a state level disaster that's declared by the governor. So a little bit difference in the type of disaster and how the resources and the funding come about. We certainly are trying to be more proactive. A perfect example wasn't really a declared emergency, but a very large-scale event was our Southview fire. We have policies in place that allow council to approve and the city manager to approve emergency funding for different things. Our fire department, out of our budget, paid the Humane Society to house animals for those residents. We didn't seek reimbursement. It was just something that we kind of took on. Had that event been a little bit larger, housing, things like that, we could have came back to council for emergency expenditures, could be reimbursement. So a little bit different in terms of where that disaster and how it's declared occurs. Does that help?
Well, it addresses where the funding comes from, the pay for the people whose property is commandeered, and perhaps the Constitution handles this anyway, because I don't think the government's allowed to take property without just compensation. So I may be worrying about a detail that's not specified in here that doesn't need to be, but it looked to me that when you put 6 with 8 together, or 6 with B on the next page, that we were sort of disclaiming any responsibility for liability that we might incur by doing the very actions that we're authorizing ourselves to do through this ordinance. And that's what my concern is.
And I don't want to throw the city attorney under the bus per se, but it's our understanding that this is, like Jackie said, very templated language that has been through the city attorney. We certainly wouldn't want to just wave a magic wand and abstain ourselves from any liability. Really, I've been in the emergency services for 30 years now, and I've never had an instance where we needed to commandeer or take something. Even in South Florida, going through hurricanes, the city would work and deals with gas station owners to obtain fuel from them for our emergency vehicles, and we negotiated a price and we were able to do all that, and that would be our intent here under a worst case scenario, if you will.
Yeah, I realize that we're probably, the likelihood of an emergency rising to this level is pretty remote, but then I started reading in here things like influenza epidemics, which is also very rare, but yeah, we could get some catastrophic emergency that
And I would agree, we've been really lucky in the city of Littleton, but obviously not immune. There's been several instances where we've had impact to the community, and studies are showing that large-scale events are on the rise, so.
Yeah, and I fully agree with having something very well spelled out on what the authority is and how it's delegated and who calls it and stuff like that. My concern is simply in what appears to be language that's not clear on the compensation for that.
Our intent's to be proactive.
Bill?
Yes, Manager Irwin and Chief Armstrong, in case you're needed on this. What this is intended to do, and I'm going to make a statement so you can modify how close it is, which is to deal with the operations side of emergency response and getting us to the point of public peace, health, and safety. This does not cover remediation of property that would be covered by insurance or would be otherwise addressed through, say, FEMA or some of the state emergency funding for remediation side. This is mostly to deal with the operations side of the emergency response. And if I've got that wrong, you'll correct me.
To an extent, you're absolutely correct, but I would say having a policy like this in place will expedite any expanding incidents to the federal level.
Because there's a mitigation of risk, and that's included in this. But it's also an operational response. This is not designed to restore someone's home or, as has happened in Louisiana, fix someone's vehicle that's been underwater for a week.
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Other questions? Peggy?
This is a minor one, but I'm looking on page 5 under 1-19-7A, and now I've got to move this number 5. To promulgate the City of Littleton Emergency Operations Plan in conformity with law, provided that such shall designate a line of succession for the City of Littleton administrative officers in the event that the city manager or designee are unable to serve as city manager, et cetera, in that part. That's fairly clear. We kind of have that already. But the rest of the sentence says, and shall describe the line of succession for the mayor, mayor pro tem, and council in conformity with the provisions of the City of Littleton Charter and state law. So I'm thinking we're going to have to do something if it says we need to have that established.
So definitely City Council will be kept in the loop as to if a declaration is needed.
No, I think, yes, but this is line of succession.
Sure.
So if by dreadful chance the mayor and the mayor pro tem get bumped off, somehow swooshed up by a tornado, somebody else would succeed in those positions.
Yes, and that's defined in the plan.
Pardon?
That is defined in the emergency operations plan.
So something else needs to happen, right, officially. This is the general, and then we would have to, pretty soon, because who knows when the tornado's coming, right?
The emergency operations plan that you guys adopted in 2013 lays out that line of succession, where this policy is only specific to the declaration process. So the plan puts the policy into effect. The plan are the wheels.
These still stay together?
Yes. They're absolutely, they're both just as important. I mean, they're two different documents. They do different things. But in building an emergency management program, they both need to be in place.
Okay.
They don't have the policy. So what we're trying to do is implement the policy that should be going along with the plan.
Please talk into the mic.
Sorry. We're trying to, we have an emergency operations plan in place. What we don't have is a policy that outlines how we declare emergencies and what the process is for that. So what we're trying to do is tie the two together. So this policy, once it's adopted, hopefully tonight, will allow us to operate with this plan under an emergency situation.
Okay,
And the plan outlines your succession that you're
Okay,
asking
but it
about.
seems to me then the plan ought to have all the details in it, and the policy, in my head, ought to essentially be, the city shall have an emergency operation plan. I mean, as simple as that. And maybe that's pretty naive, but because why have this fairly long thing that then you have to go to the very specific stuff to really deal with?
So again, that the policy allows council and the city manager the ability to declare an emergency. The emergency operations plan tells us how we do preparedness, response, and recovery.
And that's all good, but
Correct.
we've got 9 pages here telling us how to declare an emergency, and that seems to me plan stuff rather than policy. And
It's
maybe-
more than that, though, because this is an ordinance that we're passing. We're giving ourselves, to read here, we are giving ourselves the broadest power permitted by constitutional and statutory authority to preserve the public peace, health, safety, and welfare, which I'm not disagreeing with. But part of what we're giving ourselves,
But we already have that, right?
no,
We
not
don't have
necessarily.
that. I
So-
thought that's what we did. But anyway,
So
I'm
we're
sorry.
giving ourselves some specific authorities that are pretty drastic and probably necessary in an emergency. We're giving ourselves the authority or the designated people to commandeer property, to set pricing for commodities, to do all sorts of things that in normal circumstances we would never do. And so the way I'm reading it is this gives us authorities to do things that we don't have now, and it defines when those authorities become active through the declaration process, which is why I'm concerned about the reimbursement for commandeering. We're not talking about paying people back for vehicles that are underwater. We're talking about paying people back for vehicles that the police or the fire department or the city manager or his designee determine are necessary in order to respond to an emergency. So it's more than just this and the plan, so this is invoking our ability or giving us the power to use certain extreme police powers in dire circumstances.
I still think there's a way to put it in a pretty short statement, but I'm not prepared to do it right now.
Other comments, Debbie?
I have a question. It says on page 5, section 5, line 41, the provisions of the City of Littleton Charter. I'm looking at the charter, I can't find where it designates that line of succession for the mayor pro tem.
The charter does talk about the mayor, and then if the mayor can't serve, then the mayor pro tem steps in, but then it's silent after that.
And if they were, God forbid, killed, I think the charter has a process for selecting a new one. I don't think we have a process for selecting council members if council members are, I mean, this is really getting into esoteric stuff, but.
But it is, I mean, if we all happen to be in this room when whatever it is happens and poof, we're gone, what happens?
So if I could, many municipalities will carry that much further than some of the council because the process of response and activities during a disaster have to continue. So a lot of times you'll find that after, in terms of policy decision, council members are incapacitated all to the point where it can't be done. City managers, assistant city managers, we have a responsibility and a duty to carry on those activities in the absence to a certain extent. So you're right, there's not enough probably succession planning outlined under dire emergencies. And again, like I stated before, we're really trying to be proactive here. We're preparing for the worst and hoping for the best, if you will.
More comments? Doug?
So I'm trying to decide what to do. If you're going to bring it back for a more delineated succession for council members, and I'm not sure that we can do that here, there may have to be something.
It'd be in the plan, which we are bringing to you soon, an updated plan, and that's where we would outline that, and we could talk about it.
I'm not sure that succession for council ought to be contained in a plan rather than a charter. I don't know what the right vehicle is. But I think this is a very good first step, so.
Additional comments from the council? So just to summarize what I'm seeing in the discussion, could you look, the city attorney look and see if we're missing something? But I think what you said is correct. The charter is silent after Mayor Pro Tem. It doesn't talk about a replenishment of a formal structure in a council that has been depleted because of this kind of thing. I mean, it just doesn't go there. I think Councilmember Clark and Councilmember Cole are going around the idea it's got to be a charter change, which would be a vote. We are still considering charter changes on an occasional basis, and so this might be one that we want to get prepared to do during an election, but when it's timely. And in the meantime, I think we can have a little bit of a council protocol or legislative rule that could fill it in some way. It may not raise to the level of a charter and something that could be challenged, but we'd have something that says the remaining members of council vote, or whatever it would be, whatever it is that does it.
But it would seem to me, in one sense, that an awful lot of ordinances would get suspended in some, like a military state or whatever, but not that, but that you would have some suspension of an awful lot of things if the very worst kinds of disasters would occur in the city. And so, I mean, there must be some places in the country that have dealt with really dreadful emergencies that maybe could give us some thoughts on that. I mean, we could be guided by how the devil they're doing that.
I'm happy to do research alongside Kristen, but I also want to point out that the city does have a continuity of operations plan in place for those specific things if a major event happens. And how are we going to keep
So
the
again,
government
we've got maybe to need more in a plan and keep at the high level here, right? So it's how to phrase that and then to follow up with whatever else we need to put in the plan.
Go ahead, Chair. Sure.
I like this plan. It's a start. I mean, yeah, we can rewrite it. We can tell how we can make it better. But I think tonight, council, we should at least get this out there, and we can always go forward with it later. But we can talk about how we can make it better all night, but it's 9:14, and I think we got a good plan in front of us, and that's what we ought to go with right now.
I agree. What I was going to ask for is, can we pass this? If we pass this, can we get a memo from the attorney about the compensation for commandeered stuff? And if we don't need to do anything, that's fine. You explain that in the memo. If we do, then you can bring it back for a change at some time in the future.
Absolutely.
Cool. Okay.
All right.
So,
Mayor Beckman, I would add to Doug's comment that also a comment about succession planning as well.
yeah, I think that's going to be more complex, but we probably ought to start the process of doing that too.
Well, I'm concerned to approve this where it says we conform with the City of Littleton Charter. It just stops at the Mayor Pro Tem, so
We're not going to.
why even have that in there?
But it,
I mean,
but the charter does cover at least some level of succession.
Yeah, because that's the only
Where?
part that the chair.
Where?
It talks about remaining members taking a vote.
Where?
It says whenever there's not the mayor or mayor pro tem there, and you have a quorum otherwise, it's in there.
Yeah, I believe you're right. That if they're both absent, then
I've
they,
actually read the
then the
document.
charter,
That's succession.
then the council
but I think
elects
Hell's
an
gonna freeze over
acting
tonight.
pro tem. Yes. Oh, good job.
Okay, do we have additional questions for staff? I'm not seeing any. Thank you, staff. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Open the public hearing at 9:16. I have no one who would like to speak, and I'm not seeing anyone who would like to extend it into the evening any further. So I'll close the hearing also 9:16 and a few seconds later. At this point, the public portion of the hearing is closed. Council has a chance just for any other questions or a motion in a second.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve on second reading the ordinance adding Chapter 19 to Title I of the City Code, adopting an emergency management policy.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion?
Was that you, Jerry? The second?
It's Jerry that seconded it.
Still me.
Sorry.
Still me. Yes.
Any further discussion? Are we ready to vote? Seeing we're ready to vote?
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries unanimously.
All right.
We have no general business. General business is on the agenda number 8. I'm unaware of any general business. None was posted. This brings us to 9, public comment. This is just the last chance that somebody might have for something that hasn't come up previously. And clerk's going up to see if there's any public comment.
Thanks, Chief. Pam's ready to go.
I have no one that wishes to use this second public comment section. Brings us
We
to,
have a couple of D1s.
well, we have some hands raised. Pam?
Council, I'd like you to take under deliberation an amendment or ordinance or some legislation which would allow citizens to appeal any decision of council to the Board of Adjustment or some other body which would consider the legislation passed by the council independently of the council. That's it.
Thank you. Don?
Webster's defines esoteric as meant to be understood by only a chosen few. And I have to say that council's negative votes on Resolution 13 are very puzzling. Some of you said that you didn't think it was proper or it was fully cooked. My words, not yours. But it would have been a stopgap measure to deal with the purposes for which you actually passed the emergency moratorium. Having voted no on both of those takes that away. And that seems inexplicable. So I have to say that from my perspective, those who voted no on it, I think everyone who voted no voted for that moratorium. So you leave us to think that you did that as a facade, that you didn't really take it seriously. Is that true? I mean, it's really puzzling. And I want to compliment Councilman Clark and Mayor Beckman for pointing out that he really did feel the need to take this back, the issue back, so that the council itself could make those decisions, because they are very important, because you're the city's executive and legislative body. And I very much appreciate that you didn't want to leave that in the board's, now it's the commission's hands. So for me, that's very esoteric. And even if you didn't think it was fully baked, by voting no on it, you took that away. Because you don't have time with first and second readings, and now the door's open. And I find that very disappointing. If I'm wrong, it'd be interesting to know, since it is very esoteric. I don't understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Any other hands? Anybody? Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Leah Burkett from District 4, and to the 4 of you who voted no on Ordinance 13, I wanted to ask you to take a moment and consider, or have you thought about the precedent that has already been set for B2 zoning interpretations. The moratorium will be expiring on Monday, and now that these interpretations have been made and it's highly public knowledge, you could have 10 applications on your desk asking for the same interpretations, and I don't think that's what you guys want from the comments that I've heard over the past year. So I remember, Mr. Sinanek, when you came back from your cycling tour after the motion to terminate the city manager was made, you asked for a motion for reconsideration. And if any of you think that's appropriate tonight, or if that's legally available, I think you ought to do it. A precedent has been set, and if that moratorium was all for nothing, you stopped people who wanted to develop, and it looks a little silly. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. Following the agenda, there's no other public comment. This would bring us to number 10 on the agenda, comments and reports. Our acting city manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I just have a couple of quick updates here. Last week, a resident and past city council member, Amy Conklin, sent all of council an email regarding kind of our stormwater utility and our ability to kind of manage process relative to our permit. A permit separate, obviously, from our wastewater permit at the plant. I do plan to kind of address some of those issues when we discuss the budget here in about 2 weeks, specifically to the utility. So I just want to make comment on that. Now that we're kind of moving into the fall and our meet, greet, and eat has kind of expired for the year, we will be circulating with council the sign-up sheet for the council coffees. So we're looking at maybe 4 here for the balance of the year. And then finally, we did send to the council the budget, of course, last week. And I would just like to ask again, if at all possible, as you review the budget, that you please send to staff, specifically me, any kind of questions that you've got that you would like us to address in the presentation. And it was that Wednesday, September 14th was the date that I was suggesting to council for that deadline. Again, the questions, I think, is an opportunity for us to kind of prepare and hopefully facilitate a deeper discussion with the council regarding our budget. And Mr. Mayor, that's the end of my comments.
Thank you. Let's go down to council for council reports. Let's start with Council Member Hopping.
Thank you, Mayor Beckman. I just had a couple things. Number one, the budget books are out, and those of you who want a little light reading, it's about 3 inches of it. So it's good, but it starts right out with a budget message, and I think it's well done, directed to the point, and we all listened to Acting City Manager Ralph and our Finance Director, Doug Farman, say it in general terms, but I'd like to read part of this into the record. It says, this is addressed to Mayor and Council. It says, there's considerable demand for increased services throughout Littleton, but the long-term financial sustainability of the city requires deferring many operating and capital expenses. Capital request. The policy of transferring funds from the general fund to the capital projects fund for public infrastructure and capital replacements is unsustainable, as the cost of services are increasing at a rate higher than revenues. And then it goes on to say it's clear from the work staff has completed over the last few years that a substantial investment, and this is in infrastructure, is necessary to maintain the value of community assets. In the next couple of years, it will be essential for the city to critically examine and align the priorities of citizens with the limited resources of future budgets. New revenue options or opportunities must also be evaluated, and a priority-based discussion considered as a strategic approach to managing our long-term financial stability. So as we enter budget talks, I'd like to encourage Manager Relf that we have that as part of it rather than just diving into line items and revenues and that type of thing. How are we going to sustain revenues in the city? What additional revenue sources are we going to explore? And if, you know, and we need to look at that at a lot of different angles. I'd look for that to be part of the budget process. The second thing I had is kudos to the Community Development Department, or development, not, I'm stumbling over my departments, but Littleton won the 2016 Governor's Award for Downtown Excellence in the large community category for the Littleton Signage and Wayfaring Project. So that's a nice thing that the city was awarded, and so congratulations to the people involved in that. That's all I had.
Thank you. Councilmember Cernanik.
Yes, wanted to mention that our Aging Well Resource Center was written up in the AARP magazine. It was done by a independent author that had come and taken pictures and interviewed a number of folks in the city. And one of the things that I'll tail on to what Councilmember Hopping had to say about increased services. We're now at the point where 40% of our residents today are over the age of 50. So not saying that everyone that's over 50 is a senior necessarily, but trying to deal with that. And what's nice about the article, and it was done, and also folks from the Area Agency on Aging were interviewed as well. It positions Littleton as leveraging what we can in being able to direct those in need, whether they happen to be seniors themselves or their adult children, on that. And so it's a well-written article, and or at least I think it is from that particular perspective. So thank you for all of that, and it was exciting to see the cyclists earlier too. So.
Councilmember Pass. Councilmember Cole.
Yeah, so one response to people, because we didn't vote a certain way on something tonight does not mean that we have chucked aside the issue. At least that's my understanding, that we are going to be looking more at the issue. We just weren't ready to be supporting the particular version brought to us. And that's enough. Thank you.
Councilmember Clark.
Nothing.
Mayor Pro Tem Brinkman.
Yeah, I normally won't make a comment after we've made our comments and voted, but the couple of comments this evening, I was the one that brought that moratorium. And the intention was then to have a thoughtful look at this on many levels. Maybe the 90 days or 60 days, whatever it ended up being, wasn't enough time. I agree with Councilmember Cole. It wasn't a vote to not do anything. It was a vote against what we had in front of us. And I think that it was full of unintended consequences, that there were landmines in there that I'm not sure we would know until we hit them, which is never good. We are doing a complete review of the code, and I really do hope that, and I really, through this, have learned that piecemealing decisions on that code is not the way to do it, and it needs to be an overall look. And this is, everything is interrelated to each other through that. Councilmember Hopping mentioned the B2s are sprinkled all over town. They are, but when you make an effect on a B2 in downtown Littleton, it can affect the B2 out off a county line in Littleton, where what you want in either one of those places can be completely different, but you have the same zoning. So what does that start to look like? And how do we look at this citywide on a more thoughtful, more intentional scale in order to get what we want and not end up with something that we are trying to figure out how to change again. So I'm not going to drop the urgency I feel and have been pushing for years on getting this code revised, and I would like to start seeing even more action on that, but that's all going to be pieces and parts of this, and I think the community engagement in this is also going to be important. The community engagement we had on that B2, the responses back on that largely were, leave it alone. So I think there's more that needs to be done and more conversation that needs to happen. Tonight was not what we needed on that, in my opinion, and that's why I voted no for tonight on that. And I don't have any other report.
Just a reminder to council that now that the budget's been distributed, if we have questions in the budget, that we can get to the city manager ahead of time so that he can research them and have them ready to answer. It'll sure help us as we move along over our 3 days of the budget. So probably now might be the time to begin to look at those questions so they have time to research them. And I do want to make a comment about code enforcement issues. I do feel like as a city, we may be losing the standard on code enforcement. And I've talked with the city manager about it. He has a meeting planned with his own staff to talk about that. But as I look around, I see places where in the past, they didn't look like this. They look different now, and a lot of them are weeds, a lot of them are overgrown. And I know we do mostly things on complaints, but I think we need to really step it up because as one of the council members says, it's a lot to do with curb appeal. And I can give you an example of 2 places. One was brought up already, actually. Prince to Windermere on the trail, and start looking at some of those lots that adjoin it and are adjacent to it, and I think they're in violation of our length of grass and weeds. And then you look at the old Marathon site, there's some weeds up there that are just out of sight, and you know, they're a plague now to the entire community around them when the wind picks up, and it's our obligation to make sure that that's taken care of. So there's just 2 real obvious ones, and there's a lot of other ones that can be talked about around town that are not just weeds, but things left out on trash points and things like that. I would like to see us really relook that, and maybe it's an attitude rather than a resource. So, with that, we're adjourned.
All right.